The gunshot tore through the restaurant before Sabrina could think. She didn't think. She moved, throwing herself between the bullet and the 5-year-old boy clinging to his mother's skirt. The impact punched through her shoulder like fire, and the last thing she saw before darkness swallowed her whole was a pair of cold gray eyes widening in something that looked almost like shock. In Chicago, mercy is a luxury the powerful can't afford. But sometimes, the most dangerous men are the ones forced to remember they were once children too, terrified, helpless, and praying someone would step between them and the violence. Welcome to our channel, where second chances aren't given. They're fought for with blood, sacrifice, and the kind of love that breaks every rule. If you believe even the most ruthless hearts can change, hit that subscribe button and smash the like to support stories that make you feel something real. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Now let's see how one reckless act of courage bound a runaway wife to the most feared man in the city. The November wind rattled the windows of Rosetti's diner on South Ashland, carrying the smell of snow that hadn't fallen yet. Sabrina Torres wiped down the counter for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, her hands moving on autopilot while her mind spiraled through the same desperate calculations it had run 1,000 times before. $342 in her savings account. First month's rent for a studio apartment, $1,200. Security deposit, $1,200 more. Her car had 200,000 miles and a check engine light that had been glowing for 6 months. John knew where she worked. He'd found her twice already, cornering her in the parking lot with that smile that used to charm her and now just made her skin crawl. "You can't run forever, Sabby," he'd whispered last week, his hand too tight on her wrist. "You're my wife. You come home or I make you." She'd lied to the manager, said she'd fallen. Again. The bruises on her arms told a different story, but Chicago had taught Sabrina one unshakable truth. Nobody helped unless you paid them to care. The bell above the door chimed. Sabrina looked up, her customer service smile already fixed in place, and froze. 6 men walked in like they owned the air itself. The one in front wore a suit that probably cost more than Sabrina made in a year, charcoal gray and perfectly tailored, his. Dark hair swept back from a face carved from stone and danger. He moved with the kind of confidence that made people step aside without realizing they'd moved at all. Bruno Torini. She'd heard the name whispered in the kitchen, seen his photo in the Tribune above headlines about alleged organized crime. But photographs didn't capture the cold precision in those gray eyes, or the way every man behind him kept his hand near his jacket pocket. Behind Bruno, a thin man in a stained jacket clutched his wife's hand. The woman held a little boy against her chest, his small face buried in her shoulder. The husband's eyes were red-rimmed, desperate. "Mr. Torini, please," the man stammered. "I just need more time." "You had time, Marcus." Bruno's voice was quiet, almost gentle. That somehow made it worse. 60 days. You borrowed 20,000. You've paid back 3. My son, he's sick. The medical bills. Not my concern. Bruno stopped in the center of the empty diner. It was 10 p.m., shift change, and Sabrina was alone. Her coworker had left early, and the manager was in the back office counting registers. "You made a deal. Honor it, or there are consequences." The wife's breath hitched. The little boy lifted his head, brown eyes wide and confused. He looked maybe 5, wearing Spider-Man pajamas under his winter coat. Sabrina's hands tightened on the counter. She knew that look. The bewildered terror of a child who didn't understand why the adults were scared but could feel it seeping into his bones anyway. She'd worn that expression herself once, hiding behind her mother while her father raged. "Please," the wife whispered. "Don't hurt us. We'll find a way." "You'll find a way tonight," Bruno said. His tone never changed. 20,000 by midnight, or Marcus loses more than money. Do you understand? One of Bruno's men stepped forward, putting his hand on Marcus's shoulder. The threat was unspoken, but crystal clear. Something inside Sabrina snapped. "Leave them alone." The words cut through the tension like a blade. Every head turned toward her. Bruno's gray eyes locked onto hers, and for a terrible second, Sabrina's entire body screamed at her to take it back, to apologize, to disappear into the floor. But the little boy was still watching, and Sabrina had spent 3 years letting John tell her she was worthless, that she deserved every slap, every cruel word. She was done being silent. "Excuse me," Bruno said softly. Sabrina stepped out, from behind the counter. Her legs felt like water, but she kept moving until she was standing between Bruno and the family. "I said leave them alone. He's got a sick kid. You want your money? Fine. But don't threaten a child." The restaurant went so quiet, she could hear her own heartbeat hammering in her ears. Bruno tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "Do you know who I am?" "Yeah." Her voice shook, but she didn't back down. "You're the guy about to walk away, and let this family figure it out without scaring a 5-year-old. One of Bruno's men laughed, sharp, disbelieving. Another muttered something in Italian that Sabrina didn't understand. Bruno's expression didn't change. He took one step toward her, close enough that she could smell expensive cologne and something darker underneath. "You're either very brave," he murmured, "or very stupid." "Probably both," Sabrina whispered. For half a second, something flickered in those cold gray eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition, like he saw something in her defiance that resonated with a part of him he'd buried long ago. Then the front window exploded. Glass sprayed inward in a glittering wave. Sabrina heard gunfire, sharp, deafening cracks that punched through the walls and shattered the coffee pots behind the counter. Someone screamed. Bruno shoved Marcus and his family to the floor, his men drawing weapons in synchronized motion. Sabrina saw the little boy standing frozen, eyes wide, too terrified to move. She didn't think. She threw herself across the space between them and wrapped her arms around the child, twisting her body to shield him as she hit the ground. Pain exploded through her left shoulder, white hot, stealing her breath. She felt the boy's small hands clutching her shirt, felt his rapid heartbeat against her chest. "It's okay," she gasped, even though blood was soaking through her uniform. "You're okay." Her vision blurred. The gunfire stopped as abruptly as it had started. She heard Bruno's voice, sharp and commanding, shouting orders, felt strong hands lifting her carefully, someone cursing in Italian. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness dragged her under was Bruno's face above hers, his gray eyes no longer cold, but burning with something fierce and almost protective. "Get her to the car," he snapped. "Now." Then darkness. Sabrina woke to silk. The sensation registered before the pain. Smooth, cool fabric against her cheek, so different from the rough cotton sheets in her studio apartment. Then her shoulder caught fire, a deep throbbing ache that made her gasp and jerk upright. Wrong move. The room tilted, nausea rolling through her stomach. Strong hands caught her shoulders, easing her back against pillows that smelled faintly of cedar and something expensive. "Don't." The voice was low, commanding, familiar. "You'll tear the stitches." Sabrina's eyes focused slowly. Bruno Torini sat in a leather chair, beside the bed, his jacket discarded, sleeves rolled to his elbows. In the soft golden light from the bedside lamp, she could see faint scars on his forearms, thin white lines that spoke of a violent history. His gray eyes watched her with an intensity that should have frightened her. It did frighten her, but she was too disoriented to run. "Where am I?" Her voice came out hoarse, throat dry. "My home." He poured water from a crystal pitcher into a glass, held it to her lips. "Drink." She wanted to refuse on principle. She'd learned the hard way that accepting anything from powerful men came with a price. But her mouth felt like sandpaper, so she drank. The water was cold, clean, perfect. When was the last time she'd had water that didn't taste like rust from old pipes? The boy, Sabrina said suddenly, memory flooding back. Glass shattering. Gunfire. Small hands clutching her shirt. Is he safe? Bruno set the glass down. You shielded him. Took a bullet in the shoulder. It went clean through. No major damage, but you lost a lot of blood. My doctor stitched you up. Your doctor. She should be in a hospital. She should call the police. But even through the fog of pain medication, she knew how that would end. John had friends on the force, men who'd looked the other way every time she'd tried to file a report. And Bruno Torini probably owned half the cops in Chicago. She was trapped again. Different cage, same helplessness. I need to leave. Sabrina tried to sit. Up again, slower this time. The room was massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows showing a snow-covered lawn, furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine, artwork on the walls that was probably worth more than her entire life. Everything was tasteful, expensive, controlled. Just like John's house had been, before she'd learned that beautiful things could hide ugly truths. You can't. Bruno's voice held no apology. Andrea Petrov attacked my meeting. He wanted me dead. But his men saw you. Interfere. You're a witness. He'll come for you. Then I'll go to the police. The police can't protect you from Petrov. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He runs the Russian operation on the north side. Trafficking, weapons, things I don't touch. He's been trying to move into my territory for 2 years. You stepped between his bullets and a family I was collecting from. In his mind, you're mine now. And he kills anything of mine he can reach. Sabrina's stomach knotted. I'm not yours. I know. Something flickered in his expression, almost respect. But Petrov doesn't care about the truth. He cares about sending a message. She stared at him, trying to read the angles of his face, the careful neutrality that probably hid a dozen calculations. He looked like John sometimes. That same controlled intensity. But John had smiled when he hurt her. Bruno's face was stone. So what? Sabrina said quietly. You keep me locked up here like a prisoner? I keep you alive. He stood, walking to the windows. His reflection ghosted against the dark glass. You stay here under my protection until Petrov is dealt with. You'll have your own room, freedom of the house, anything you need. In exchange. He turned to face her. You tell anyone who asks that you work for me, that you're under my protection. It keeps you safe. It keeps the family you saved safe. And what do you get out of it? His lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Satisfaction of knowing the woman stupid enough to challenge me in my own collection isn't bleeding out in an alley. Sabrina studied him, looking for the trap. With John, there had always been traps, small kindnesses that came with expectations, gifts that turned into chains. I don't need saving. You took a bullet for a stranger's child. Bruno's voice softened, just barely. You need someone watching your back. I've been watching my own back for 3 years. I know. He pulled his phone from his pocket, tapped the screen, held it out to her. John Torres. Reported you missing 2 days ago. He's been calling hospitals, shelters, putting up flyers. He's very concerned about his wife's safety. The photo on the screen showed John in front of their old house, his face arranged in perfect worry. Sabrina's hands clenched in the silk sheets. He's not concerned. He's hunting. I know that too. Bruno pocketed the phone. My men have been keeping him away from the hospital where you were supposed to be. Registered, But he's persistent. Eventually he'll find you. Unless he believes you're somewhere he can't touch. Like here. Like here. Sabrina's shoulder throbbed. Her head hurt. She was so tired of running, of being afraid, of waking up in places she didn't choose, because men decided where she belonged. And if I say no? Bruno was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something she hadn't expected. Honesty. Then I'll have my men take you to a safe house outside the Duri city. You'll have money, a new ID, and a car. But Petrov has a long reach, and John has obsession. You'd be alone. I've always been alone. Yes. He held her gaze, and for a second she saw something raw beneath the ice. So have I. Maybe that's why we recognize each other. Sabrina wanted to argue, to tell him they were nothing alike. But she was exhausted, in pain, and terrifyingly aware that the first time in 3 years she'd felt safe enough to sleep deeply was in the home of Chicago's most dangerous man. I need time, she whispered. Bruno nodded. You have until you're healed. Then you decide. He moved toward the door, then paused. There's clothes in the closet, food in the kitchen whenever you want it. And Sabrina. He glanced back. Thank you. For the boy. Not many people would have done that. He left before she could respond, closing the door softly behind him. Sabrina sat in the enormous bed, surrounded by silk and safety she didn't trust, and tried not to think about how the most terrifying part wasn't Bruno's power. It was how much she wanted to believe him. 3 days passed in a fever dream of pain medication and restless sleep. Sabrina would wake to find trays of food beside her bed. Warm soup, fresh bread, fruit that tasted like it had never seen the inside of a discount grocery store. She never saw who brought them. On the 4th morning, she woke clear-headed for the first time. Her shoulder still ached, but the sharp fire had dulled to a manageable throb. She sat up slowly, testing her range of motion, and noticed the clothes laid out on the chair by the window. Soft gray sweater, dark jeans that looked like they'd actually fit, thick socks. All new, tag still attached, exactly her size. Someone had been paying attention. Sabrina dressed carefully, biting back a hiss when the sweater pulled at her stitches. The fabric was cashmere. She recognized it from the department stores she'd window shopped but never entered. It felt like wearing a cloud. She opened the bedroom door and stepped into a hallway that belonged in an architectural magazine. Hardwood floors gleamed beneath her feet. Crown molding traced elegant lines along cream-colored walls. Through tall windows, morning sunlight poured across snow-covered grounds that stretched toward a line of bare trees. The house was silent. Not the tense, waiting silence of John's house where she'd learned to move like a ghost. This was different. Peaceful, almost. She followed the hallway downstairs, her hand trailing along the smooth banister. The foyer opened into a living room with leather furniture and a fireplace big enough to walk into. Books lined built-in shelves, not for show, but worn, read, loved. She saw Italian titles mixed with English, philosophy next to crime thrillers, a collection of poetry by someone named Neruda. A man who killed for a living read poetry. The thought unsettled her more than it should have. Voices drifted from somewhere deeper in the house. Low, male, tense. Sabrina followed the sound through a dining room with a table that could seat 20, down another hallway, until she stood outside a partially open door. I don't care what his excuse is. Bruno's voice, sharp as broken glass. He skimmed from the shipment. He knows the rules. Boss, he's got kids. Then he should have thought about them before he stole from me. A pause. Marco handles it. Tonight. Make it clean. Sabrina's stomach turned cold. This was the real Bruno. Torini. Not the man who'd held water to her lips, but the one who ordered deaths over breakfast. She should leave. Go back upstairs. Pretend she hadn't heard. Instead, she pushed the door open. Bruno sat behind a massive desk, 3 men standing before him. He looked up as she entered, his expression shifting from cold authority to something more guarded. "Sabrina, you should be resting." "I've been resting for 4 days." She met his gaze, refusing to look away even though her heart hammered. "Were you just ordering someone killed?" The 3 men stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Nobody questioned Bruno Torini. Nobody interrupted his meetings. Nobody lived long after showing such disrespect. Bruno's jaw tightened. "Out," he said quietly to his men. They left without a word, closing the door behind them. The silence stretched, heavy and dangerous. "You want to know if I was ordering someone killed?" Bruno said finally. "Yes, a man who stole from me, who endangered an entire operation and the people who depend on it for their livelihoods. He has kids. So do the 50 men who work for me, whose families eat because they know I keep my word, on rewards and punishments." He stood, moving around the desk. "I don't expect you to understand my world, Sabrina. I don't expect you to approve, but don't mistake protection for absolution. I'm not a good man." "I know." She should be terrified. John had hit her for less than this, for questioning, for challenging, for existing too loudly. But Bruno didn't move toward her with fists clenched. He just watched her, waiting. "But you saved me. You're keeping that family safe. You rid Neruda." His eyes narrowed. "You went through my things. Your bookshelves aren't exactly hidden." Sabrina crossed her arms carefully, mindful of her shoulder. "I'm just trying to figure out who you are. The man who kills, or the man who made sure I had cashmere instead of some cheap sweater that would irritate my stitches." Bruno was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something raw. "I'm both. That's the point. I can't be one without the other." "Everyone's both something," Sabrina said softly. "Light and shadow. I just never met someone who was so honest about it." He looked at her like she'd said something in a language he'd forgotten he knew. Then he turned away, moving to the window. "You should eat. Maria made pancakes. Kitchen's through the dining room." Sabrina recognized a dismissal. But as she turned to leave, she noticed something on the bookshelf behind his desk. A photograph, face down, as if someone had deliberately hidden it, but couldn't bring themselves to throw it away. "Bruno?" She hesitated. "That photo. Why is it facing down?" His shoulders tensed. "Leave it." "Is it your family?" "I said leave it." The words came out harder, edged with something that sounded almost like pain. Sabrina backed toward the door, but her curiosity burned. "When you're ready to tell, me," she said quietly, "I'll listen." She left him standing by the window, his reflection ghosted in the glass, looking more alone than anyone she'd ever seen. The kitchen was warm, all copper pots and marble countertops, and windows overlooking a snow-covered garden. A woman in her 60s stood at the stove, gray hair pinned back, wearing an apron that said, "Kiss the cook," in faded letters. "You must be Sabrina." The woman smiled, genuine and warm. "I'm Maria, Mr. Torini's housekeeper. Sit." "Sit. You look like you need feeding." Sabrina sat at the kitchen island, and within minutes, a plate of pancakes appeared before her, golden, fluffy, topped with fresh berries and real maple syrup. The smell alone made her mouth water. "How long have you worked for him?" Sabrina asked between bites. The pancakes were perfect, better than anything she'd ever made. 23 years. Maria poured coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen. Since he was 15 and inherited this house from his uncle. 15? Sabrina's fork paused halfway to her mouth. He ran the family business at 15? Had to. Maria's expression softened with old grief. His father was killed when Bruno was 12. His mother, she didn't survive long after. Bruno's Uncle Sal took him in, taught him the business. When Sal died, Bruno got everything. The house, the organization, the weight of 100 men's families on his shoulders. He grew up faster than anyone should. Sabrina thought of the photograph face down on the shelf, the poetry books, the way Bruno had looked when she'd asked about family, like she'd touched a wound that had never healed. He's alone here. Always has been. Maria refilled Sabrina's coffee. Until now. Their eyes met. Sabrina saw something in the older woman's gaze. Hope, maybe. Or recognition of another wounded thing seeking shelter. "I'm not staying," Sabrina said quietly. "That's what I told myself when I first came here." Maria smiled. Sometimes the safest place is the last one you'd expect. That night, Sabrina heard it. A sound from down the hall, low, anguished, pulling her from sleep. She sat up, listening. There it was again. Not quite a sob, but close. She shouldn't investigate. She should mind her business, stay in her room, remember that Bruno Torini was dangerous. But she thought of that photograph. Of the boy who'd become a man at 15. Of the way he'd looked at her when she'd said everyone was both light and shadow. Sabrina followed the sound to a door at the end of the hall. It was cracked open, golden light spilling through. She could see Bruno inside, sitting on the floor beside a small bed. A child's bed, untouched for years, toys still arranged on shelves gathering dust. He held a photograph in his hands, and his shoulders shook with silent grief. Sabrina pushed the door open. Bruno's head snapped up, his face wet with tears he tried immediately to hide. "Get out." "No." She stepped inside, closing, the door behind her. The room was frozen in time. Pink walls, stuffed animals, a mobile hanging from the ceiling with stars and moons. A little girl's room. "Bruno," Sabrina whispered. Who was she? He looked down at the photograph, his thumb tracing the image. When he spoke, his voice was broken. "My sister, Lucia. She was 7 when my father was killed. Social services took her. Said I was too young to care for her. I tried." His hands clenched around the frame. "I tried to get her back. Spent years searching. By the time I found her..." He couldn't finish. Sabrina's heart cracked. She crossed the room and knelt beside him, ignoring the protest from her healing shoulder. "I'm sorry. I swore I'd never let another child suffer." Bruno's gray eyes met hers, red-rimmed and devastated. "That's why I couldn't let Petrov touch that boy. Why I can't..." He stopped, jaw working. "Why you can't let anyone get close," Sabrina finished softly. "Because everyone you love disappears." He nodded, unable to speak. Sabrina did something she'd sworn she'd never do again. She reached out and took the hand of a dangerous man. His fingers were cold, shaking slightly. She held on anyway. They sat like that in the dark, 2 broken people finding unexpected solace in shared grief, while snow fell silently outside the window of a little girl's frozen room. The next morning, Sabrina found Bruno in the kitchen before dawn, making coffee with the focused intensity most people reserved for disarming bombs. He looked up when she entered, something unreadable flickering across his face. Embarrassment, maybe, or the residual vulnerability of someone who'd been seen crying. "You're up early," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Couldn't sleep." Sabrina settled onto a stool at the island, watching him pour 2 cups. He slid one across the marble counter toward her without asking how she took it. Black. 2 sugars. Somehow he knew. "That room, do you go there often?" Bruno's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, every year on her birthday, November 23rd. Yesterday, she'd interrupted him on the anniversary of his sister's death. "I'm sorry," Sabrina said quietly. "I shouldn't have intruded." "You didn't intrude." He leaned against the counter, cradling his cup. In the soft pre-dawn light filtering through the windows, he looked younger, less like the terrifying mob boss, and more like the 15-year-old boy who'd lost everything. "You're the first person who's ever asked about her. Who's ever—" He trailed off, searching for words. "Everyone else pretends she never existed, like acknowledging it makes me weak. Grief doesn't make you weak. In my world, it does." His gray eyes met hers over the rim of his coffee cup. "Weakness gets you killed, gets the people you love killed. I learned that when I watched my father bleed out on our living room floor while my mother screamed, and Lucia hid in the closet." Sabrina's chest ached. She'd thought her own childhood was dark, watching her father's rages, learning to disappear into walls. But Bruno had lived through something infinitely worse. "How old were you?" 12. He set his cup down with controlled precision. "Rival family sent a message. My father refused to back down from territory they wanted, so they came to our home, middle of the night, made sure we were all there to watch." "And your mother?" "Overdosed 6 months later." His voice went flat, emotionless, the tone of someone who'd told this story so many times it had lost the power to wound him. Except Sabrina could see the lie in the tension of his shoulders, the white-knuckle grip on the counter's edge. Couldn't live with what she'd seen, couldn't live with losing Lucia to the system. "I came home from school and found her." "Jesus, Bruno. Don't." The word came out sharp. "Don't pity me. I'm not that scared kid anymore. I'm the man who makes sure no one ever touches what's mine again." "Is that what I am?" Sabrina asked softly. "Something that's yours?" His eyes darkened. "You're someone under my protection. There's a difference." "Is there?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to examine. Bruno pushed away from the counter, the moment of vulnerability closing like a door slamming shut. "I have a meeting this morning. Marco will be here if you need anything. Don't leave the grounds." Bruno, but he was already gone, leaving Sabrina alone with cold coffee and the ghost of grief that lingered in the kitchen like smoke. The days developed a rhythm. Sabrina would wake to find breakfast waiting, prepared by Maria, who seemed to materialize and vanish like a benevolent spirit. She'd spend mornings reading in the library. Bruno's collection was extensive. Everything from classic literature to psychology texts to true crime that made her wonder what kind of man studied the minds of killers, while being one himself. Afternoons, she'd watch the snow fall through the floor-to-ceiling windows, trying not to think about the life she'd left behind. Her apartment was gone by now. John would have emptied it, searching for clues to where she'd gone. The few friends she'd had would have been questioned, intimidated. She imagined him sitting in their old house, methodically planning, waiting for her to slip up. She'd traded one cage for another, but at least this one had warm food and books, and a man who'd wept over his dead sister's photograph. Bruno came home late most nights, smelling of cigarette smoke and something darker. He never told her where he'd been or what he'd done, and Sabrina didn't ask. But she'd see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way his hands would shake slightly as he poured whiskey he never drank. On the 8th day, she found him in the living room at 2 a.m., staring at the cold fireplace. "Can't sleep?" she asked from the doorway. He didn't startle. "You should be in bed." "So should you." Sabrina crossed the room and sat in the chair opposite his. "What happened tonight?" "Nothing you need to know about." "Try me." Bruno's eyes cut to hers, sharp and assessing. "Why do you care?" "Because you're housing me. Because you saved my life. Because—" She stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. Because he'd shown her his broken pieces and she recognized them. Because every time John had come home angry, she'd wished for someone to ask if she was okay. Because Bruno Torini was the most dangerous man in Chicago, and yet she felt safer with him than she ever had in her own marriage. Because you're not as alone as you think you are. Something cracked in his expression. I had to make an example tonight. A kid, 19, thought he could steal from me and get away with it. He was wrong. Did you kill him? No. Bruno's voice was rough, but I hurt him badly enough that he'll never forget the mistake. And I hated myself the entire time. Sabrina absorbed that, the honesty of it. Then why do it? Because if I show mercy once, every punk in the city will test me. My men's families depend on the fear my name carries. I protect hundreds of people by being the monster everyone believes I am. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. But sometimes I wonder what I'd be if I could just stop. You'd still be you, Sabrina said quietly. The man who makes sure kids are safe, who reads poetry, who cries in his sister's room. That man's weak. That man's human. She stood, moving to sit on the arm of his chair. Close enough to touch, but not quite. And being human isn't weakness, Bruno. It's the only thing worth protecting. He looked up at her, and in the dim lamplight, his eyes held something raw and desperate. Why aren't you afraid of me? I am, she admitted, but not because you're dangerous. Because I'm starting to trust you, and trusting powerful men is what got me broken in the first place. Bruno reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers ghosted along her jaw, feather-light, reverent. I won't break you. You can't promise that. No, he agreed. But I can promise I'll try. The moment stretched, charged with possibilities neither of them knew how to name. Then Bruno's phone buzzed. He pulled back, checking the screen, and his entire body went rigid. What is it? Sabrina asked. John. Bruno's voice went cold, lethal. He's been asking questions. My men say he knows you were at Rossetti's the night of the shooting. He's putting pieces together. Fear shot through her, ice cold. He can't find me here. He won't. Bruno stood, already texting someone. But we need to make this official. Tomorrow you and I are going to make an appearance. You're going to be introduced as someone under my protection. That'll send a clear message. Touching you means war. Bruno, he's obsessed. He won't care about threats. Then he'll learn what happens when someone tries to take what's mine. The possessive edge in his voice should have terrified her. Instead, something warm and dangerous unfurled in her chest. I'm not yours, she whispered. Bruno's eyes met hers, burning. Tell me you don't feel safer with me than you felt in years. Tell me you don't sleep better knowing I'm down the hall. Tell me I'm wrong, and I'll back off. Sabrina opened her mouth to lie. To protect herself the way she'd learned to protect herself from men who claimed to care. But when she looked at Bruno, really looked at him, past the violence and power to the grieving boy who still mourned his sister, who hated what he had to be but did it anyway, she couldn't. You're not wrong, she breathed. The confession hung between them like a prayer. Bruno's thumb traced her lower lip, his touch impossibly gentle for hands that had caused so much pain. Then trust me one more day. Let me keep you safe. Sabrina nodded and tried not to think about how easily she was falling for another powerful man who promised protection. But this time, she thought as Bruno's hand slipped into hers, maybe the promise was real. The restaurant was called Aurelio's, and it existed in that razor-thin space between legitimate business and mob front. Crystal chandeliers hung over tables where Chicago's elite made deals they'd never admit to in daylight. Bruno's hand rested on the small of Sabrina's back as they entered, possessive and protective in equal measure. She wore a balsada dress Maria had procured from somewhere, midnight blue, elegant without being ostentatious, paired with heels that made her legs look longer than they were. Her shoulders still ached beneath the fabric, but the stitches were out now, leaving only a pink scar that would fade with time. Bruno wore power like a second skin. Black suit, white shirt open at the collar, his dark hair swept back to reveal the sharp angles of his face. Every eye in the restaurant tracked their movement as the maitre d' led them to a corner booth with clear sightlines to all exits. "Smile," Bruno murmured against her ear as they sat. "You're supposed to look like you want to be here." "I'm terrified," Sabrina admitted quietly. "Good. Use it. Let them see you're with me willingly. That makes you untouchable." She understood the theater of it. The way his hand lingered on hers across the table. How he leaned in when she spoke, as if her words were the only thing in the room worth hearing. They were performing protection, making it clear to everyone watching that Sabrina Torres was under the shield of Bruno Torini's name. What she hadn't expected was how much of it didn't feel like acting. There. Bruno's eyes tracked someone across the room. "Marcus Volkov, Petrov's second. He sees us. Message delivered." Sabrina resisted the urge to look. Will it work? Depends on how smart Petrov is. Bruno's thumb traced circles on her wrist, a gesture so casual it made her breath catch. Smart men know when to back down. Petrov's never struck me as particularly smart. Reassuring. His lips curved. Not quite a smile, but close. "You're safe, Sabrina. I won't let anyone hurt you." The words should have sounded arrogant. Instead, they carried the weight of absolute certainty, a promise carved in blood and bone. Their food arrived. Pasta she couldn't name. Wine that probably cost more than her monthly rent used to. Sabrina tried to eat normally while hyper-aware of the eyes watching them, the whispered conversations, the way Bruno's men stood near the exits like dark-suited sentinels. Then she saw him. John. He stood near the bar, partially hidden by a column, but his eyes burned across the distance. He looked different than she remembered, thinner, wilder, with a manic intensity that made her stomach clench. He'd always been controlling, possessive, cruel in calculated ways. But this was something new. This was obsession made flesh. "Bruno," Sabrina whispered, her hand tightening. On his. "He's here." Bruno followed her gaze, his expression going from warm to arctic in a heartbeat. He raised one hand in a subtle gesture, and two of his men began moving toward John's position. But John didn't wait. He pushed away from the bar and started toward their table, his gait unsteady, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent restaurant. "Sabrina, what the hell are you doing with this?" Bruno stood smoothly, positioning himself between John and Sabrina. "You're making a scene." "A scene?" John laughed, high and sharp. "My wife disappears for 2 weeks and I find her playing dress-up with the fucking Mafia? Yeah, I'm making a scene." "Ex-wife," Sabrina said, finding her voice. She stood too, her legs unsteady. "We're separated, John. I left." "You left?" His eyes were bloodshot, wild. "You don't get to leave. We made vows, Sabrina. Till death." "She's under my protection now," Bruno said quietly. The restaurant had gone completely silent, everyone watching the confrontation unfold. "You should leave before you do something you'll regret." John's laugh turned ugly. "Protection? Is that what we're calling it?" His gaze raked over Sabrina with something poisonous. "How long did it take, Sabby? How long before you spread your legs for another?" Bruno moved so fast Sabrina barely saw it. One moment John was speaking, the next he was on his knees, Bruno's hand twisted in his collar, his other hand poised near his jacket where she knew he carried a gun. "Finish that sentence," Bruno said softly. and they'll never find your body." "Bruno, don't." Sabrina grabbed his arm. She could feel the tension in him, the barely leashed violence. "He's not worth it." For a terrible moment, she thought he wouldn't listen. Thought she'd watch him kill John right here in front of Chicago's elite, proving every dark thing she feared about him. Then Bruno's eyes met hers, and something in her gaze made him pause, made him choose. He released John with a shove that sent the other man sprawling. "Get him out of here," he told his men. "If he comes within a mile of her again, handle it permanently." John was dragged out, still shouting threats that echoed off marble floors. The restaurant slowly resumed its normal noise level, conversations restarting with forced casualness. Bruno turned to Sabrina, his jaw tight. "We're leaving." The car ride home was silent. Sabrina watched the city lights blur past, her hands shaking in her lap. She'd seen it, the moment Bruno had almost crossed a line he couldn't uncross. The ease with which violence lived in him, ready to be unleashed. Just like John. The thought crept in unwanted, just like every powerful man who'd ever promised protection and delivered pain. "Say it," Bruno said finally, pulling into the mansion's drive. "Say what?" "That you're afraid of me now, that you saw what I am and you want out." His hands clenched the steering wheel. "Say it so I can let you go." Sabrina stared at his profile, the hard lines, the tension, the self-loathing evident in every angle. "You stopped." "What?" "I asked you not to kill him and you stopped." She turned to face him fully. "John never stopped, not once in 3 years. He'd start hitting and wouldn't stop until I passed out or he got bored. But you—" Her voice cracked. "You stopped because I asked." Bruno's eyes closed. "I wanted to kill him. Part of me still does." "I know." Sabrina reached across the console, taking his hand. "But you didn't. That's what matters." "Is it?" He looked at her, and she saw the war in him, the violence he'd been raised in, versus the man he desperately wanted to be. "Because I don't know if I can keep choosing restraint, Sabrina. Not when it comes to people who threaten you." "Then we'll figure it out together." The words hung between them, a promise neither had planned to make. Bruno's thumb traced over her knuckles, his touch achingly gentle. "You should run from me," he whispered. "Probably." Sabrina leaned closer, her forehead nearly touching his. "But I'm tired of running, and maybe—" She took a shaky breath. "Maybe the safest place is right here, with the man everyone says I should fear." Bruno's control cracked. He pulled her across the console, careful of her healing shoulder, and kissed her like a drowning man finding air. Sabrina melted into it, all her fear and longing and desperate hope pouring into the press of lips and the tangle of hands and hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Bruno rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he said roughly. "I know. Petrov will see it as weakness. John will become more dangerous. My enemies will target you. I know that too. And I'm still here." Sabrina kissed him again, softer this time. "I'm still choosing this. Choosing you." Bruno's arms tightened around her, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked almost peaceful. Neither of them saw the black sedan parked down the street, or the man inside taking photographs with a telephoto lens. Neither of them knew that Andrei Petrov had just received confirmation of his suspicions. The most dangerous man in Chicago had found something worth more than power, and Petrov knew exactly how to use that. The call came at 3 a.m. Sabrina woke to Bruno's voice, low and deadly, speaking rapid Italian in the hallway. She pulled on the robe Maria had left and found him by the window, phone pressed to his ear, his free, hand clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. When? A pause. How many? Another pause. Longer. Do it. I don't care what it costs. He ended the call and stood motionless, staring out at the snow-covered grounds. Bruno? Sabrina approached carefully. In the 2 weeks since their kiss, they'd existed in a strange liminal space, not quite together, not quite separate. He'd been gentler, more open, letting her see the man beneath the armor. But right now, that man had vanished. This was the mob boss, cold and calculating. What happened? Petrov made his move. Bruno's voice was flat. He hit 3 of my warehouses tonight, burned them to the ground. Then he sent a message. He turned to face her, and his eyes held something that made her blood run cold. He knows about you, about us, and he's coming. Fear clawed up Sabrina's throat. How long do we have? Not long enough. Bruno crossed to her, cupping her face in his hands. I need to move you. Tonight. There's a safe, house upstate, maximum security. No. The word came out sharper than she'd intended. I'm not hiding while you handle this alone. Sabrina. I said no. She pulled back, wrapping her arms around herself. Every man in my life has made decisions for me. My father, John, even you at the beginning. I'm done being moved around like a chess piece. Bruno's jaw tightened. This isn't about control. It's about keeping you alive. Then keep me alive here. Let me help. Help? His laugh was bitter. This isn't a situation you can help with, Sabrina. This is war. And war means I do things. He stopped, looking away. Things you don't need to see. You mean kill people? Yes. No hesitation, no apology. Petrov won't stop until one of us is dead. And I won't let it be me, because if I die, you die. So I'll do what needs to be done, and you'll hate me for it. And maybe that's better anyway. Stop. Sabrina stepped closer, forcing him to look at her. I know what you are, Bruno. I've always known, and I'm not asking you to be something you're not. I'm asking you to let me stand beside you instead of locking me away. If something happens to you, then it happens. But at least I'll have chosen it. Bruno stared at her, conflict written across every line of his face. Finally, he nodded. You stay, but you follow every order I give. No arguments, no hesitation. Agreed? Agreed. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heart, hammering. I can't lose you, he whispered against her hair, not like I lost everyone else. You won't. Sabrina tilted her face up, kissing him hard. We're going to survive this, together. The attack came 48 hours later. Sabrina was in the library when the windows exploded. She hit the floor on instinct, glass raining down around her, the sharp crack of gunfire splitting the air. Bruno's men returned fire from strategic positions throughout the house, their training evident in the controlled 3-round bursts. Bruno burst through the door, grabbed her arm, and hauled her toward the panic room hidden behind the bookshelf. Stay here. Don't come out until I come for you. Bruno. He kissed her once, hard and desperate. I love you. Remember that. Then he was gone, the bookshelf sliding shut, leaving Sabrina in darkness with only the muffled sounds of battle filtering through reinforced walls. She lasted 5 minutes before she heard it. John's voice, amplified by a megaphone, carrying through the chaos. Sabrina, I know you're in there. Come out, and maybe Petrov lets some of these people live. Her blood turned to ice. John was working with Petrov. The 2 men who wanted to control her had joined forces. Through the panic room's security monitors, she could see the situation deteriorating, Petrov's men had superior numbers. Bruno's people were being pushed back, taking casualties. And there, in the foyer, John stood beside Andrei Petrov, a tall man with cold blue eyes and a smile like a knife wound. Sabrina's mind raced. Bruno would die defending her. His men would die. Maria, who'd become like a mother to her, was somewhere in this house. All of them would bleed because John couldn't let go, and Petrov saw an opportunity. She made a decision. The panic room had an emergency exit, a tunnel leading to the grounds. Bruno had shown it to her, made her memorize the route. She'd promised to use it only as a last resort. This was a last resort. Sabrina moved through the tunnel, her hands shaking, her breath coming in gasps. She emerged near the garden, snow immediately soaking through her thin clothes. Gunfire echoed from the front of the house. She circled around, staying low, until she could see them. Petrov, John, and 3 armed men standing near the circular driveway. Enough! Sabrina stepped into the open, hands raised. I'm here. Let them go. Every gun swung toward her. John's face twisted into something triumphant and terrifying. There she is. My wife. Ex-wife, Sabrina corrected, her voice steady despite her terror. What do you want, John? What's mine? He started toward her, but Petrov caught his arm. Not yet. The Russian's accent was thick, his smile predatory. First, Torini comes out. Then we discuss terms. Let his people go, Sabrina said. This is between you and Bruno. They don't need to die. But they will. Petrov tilted his head. Unless you convince your lover to surrender. Call him. Out, little bird. Let's end this. Sabrina's mind worked frantically. If Bruno came out, Petrov would kill him. If he didn't, the siege would continue until everyone inside was dead. There was no winning move. Unless she made one. You want Bruno to suffer? Sabrina said slowly. Killing him is too quick. But watching me choose John over him, that would destroy him. John's eyes lit up. Petrov looked intrigued. I'll go with John, Sabrina continued, each word like swallowing glass. Willingly. You get your revenge watching Bruno lose what he loves, and nobody else has to die. Sabrina, no. Bruno's voice cracked through the night. He stood in the doorway, blood on his shirt, his gun trained on Petrov. Don't do this. It's my choice. She met his eyes across the distance, willing him to understand, to trust. I'm choosing John. We're leaving. It's over. The devastation on Bruno's face nearly broke her resolve, but she held her ground, even as John grabbed her arm possessively. Smart girl, Petrov laughed. Torini, you lose. Stand down, and I let you live with that. Bruno's gun lowered slowly. His eyes held hers, and she saw the moment he understood. Saw the calculation, the desperate plan. He gave the smallest nod. Trust me, she mouthed. John dragged her toward the waiting car. Petrov's men began withdrawing, satisfied with their psychological victory. The gunfire stopped. Sabrina went willingly, knowing she was walking into hell. But as John shoved her into the car, she felt the hard edge of the small blade she'd taken from the panic room, hidden in her sleeve. Bruno had taught her survival. Now she'd teach him that the woman he loved was done being rescued. She'd save herself. The safe house John took her to wasn't safe at all. It was a rotting warehouse on the south side, all exposed pipes and broken windows, the kind of place where screams went unheard. Petrov's men shoved her into a room with a single chair and a bare light bulb swinging overhead. John paced like a caged animal, his eyes wild with vindication and rage. 2 weeks, he spat. 2 weeks you made me look like a fool. Made me search every corner of this city while you played house with that criminal. I wasn't playing anything, Sabrina said quietly, her hands bound behind the chair. The blade pressed cold against her forearm, hidden beneath the rope. I was surviving, like I always do. Surviving? He laughed. The sound cracked and wrong. You were fucking him, Sabrina. Don't insult me with lies. Would it matter if I was? She met his eyes, no longer afraid. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. You lost the right to care when you put your hands on me the first time. John's face contorted. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides and backhanded her hard enough that her vision blurred. Blood filled her mouth, copper and warm. You're my wife, he hissed, grabbing her jaw. You don't get to decide when we're done. I do. Wrong answer. Sabrina twisted her wrists against the rope, ignoring the burn until the blade slid into her palm. One quick motion and the bindings fell away. John's eyes widened in shock as she drove the blade into his thigh. Not fatal, but debilitating. He screamed, stumbling backward. Sabrina was already moving, kicking the chair into his path, running for the door. She heard him shouting behind her, heard Petrov's men responding, boots pounding on concrete. The warehouse was a maze of corridors and shadows. Sabrina ran blind, her shoulder throbbing, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. Behind her, John's voice echoed, promising violence if she didn't stop. She'd stopped listening to his promises 3 years ago. Sabrina burst through a side door into an alley, frigid air hitting her like a wall. Snow fell heavy now, covering everything in white. She ran toward the street, toward the distant glow of traffic lights, and slammed directly into a solid chest. Arms caught her before she could fall. She looked up into gray eyes burning with barely controlled fury. Bruno, she gasped. I've got you. His voice was rough, his hands gentle as he steadied her. Behind him she saw Marco and at least a dozen armed men. Are you hurt? John's inside. She stopped, registering the blood on Bruno's knuckles, the cold death in his expression. How did you find me? Tracker in your dress. He touched her shoulder carefully, checking for injuries. I told you I wouldn't lose you. Gunfire erupted from inside the warehouse. Bruno shoved Sabrina behind him, his men returning fire with practiced precision. Through the chaos, she saw John stumble out, clutching his bleeding leg, Petrov behind him with a gun trained on Bruno. Touching, Petrov called out. The great Torini, brought low by sentiment. Your uncle would be ashamed. My uncle taught me that power means nothing if you have nothing worth protecting. Bruno's gun never wavered. You want war, Petrov? I'll give you one, but you won't survive it. Neither will she. Petrov shifted his aim toward Sabrina. Everything happened in seconds. John lunged forward, trying to grab Sabrina as leverage. She sidestepped, her survival instincts sharp, and he crashed into the snow-covered ground. Bruno fired once, twice, Petrov's gun arm, then his leg. The Russian went down hard, howling. Marco's men swarmed forward, securing both men. Bruno crossed to Sabrina, his hands framing her face, searching for injuries with an intensity that made her chest ache. You shouldn't have given yourself up, he said roughly. You would have died protecting me. I'd die anyway if I lost you. Sabrina kissed him hard, tasting snow and desperation and the promise of survival. Then it's a good thing we're both still breathing. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Bruno's expression shifted, calculating. Marco, make the call. Sabrina watched as Marco spoke into his phone, watched as unmarked. Cars arrived before the regular police. Detectives she recognized from the news, the ones on Bruno's payroll, the ones who'd turned Petrov over to federal authorities with an airtight case. Weapons trafficking, Bruno explained quietly. The FBI's been building a case for months. I just expedited their evidence collection. And John? Bruno's eyes went cold. Assault, kidnapping, Attempted murder. He's done, Sabrina. He'll never touch you again. She watched them load John into a police car, his face pressed against the window, screaming her name. But his voice had lost its power. He was just a pathetic man who'd mistaken cruelty for strength. Sabrina turned away. Take me home. The house felt different when they returned. Maybe because she'd nearly lost it. Maybe because home wasn't a place. It was standing beside Bruno while Maria fussed over their injuries, listening to Marco make terrible jokes to ease the tension, feeling safe in a way she'd never thought possible. 3 days later, Bruno found her in Lucia's room. Sabrina sat on the small bed, holding the photograph of a 7-year-old girl with dark curls and Bruno's eyes. Tell me about her, she said softly. Bruno hesitated in the doorway, then crossed to sit beside her. She loved butterflies. Used to chase them in the garden, convinced she could catch one if she was just fast enough. His voice cracked. She never did. What would she think of me? She'd love you. Bruno's hand found hers. She'd love how brave you are, how you stood between a bullet and a stranger's child, how you saved yourself when no one else could. Sabrina studied the room, the frozen shrine to a lost little girl. This can't stay like this forever. I know. Bruno's thumb traced over her knuckles. I just don't know how to let go. You don't have to let go. Sabrina leaned into his shoulder. But maybe we could transform it. Keep her memory, but make it something living instead of a tomb. Bruno was quiet for a long time. Then, what did you have in mind? 2 months later, Lucia's room bloomed with new life. The pink walls remained, but now they were adorned with butterfly decals, hundreds of them, in every color imaginable. The toys stayed on their shelves, preserved behind glass, but new books lined another wall. A rocking chair sat by the window, positioned to catch afternoon sunlight. And in the crib they'd assembled together, a baby girl slept peacefully. Not their biological child. Not yet, though. Sabrina had stopped taking the pills that prevented it, a decision they'd made together in whispered conversations at 3 a.m. This was Elena, the daughter of Marcus, the man whose debt had started everything. Marcus had died 6 months ago, cancer that the medical bills couldn't stop. His wife had followed 3 weeks later, unable to live with her grief. The 5-year-old boy Sabrina had saved, Michael, played quietly in the corner, building towers with blocks while his baby sister napped. Bruno sat cross-legged beside him, helping construct an elaborate fortress. Sabrina watched from the doorway, her hand resting on the slight swell of her stomach where their own child grew. They'd married quietly last month, just papers signed in Bruno's study with Maria and Marco as witnesses. No white dress, no church, just 2 broken people promising to be better together. Is it tall enough? Michael asked Bruno seriously. Almost. Bruno added another block. But every castle needs a strong foundation. That's what keeps it standing when storms come. Like how you keep us safe? Bruno's hand stilled. He looked at the boy. Really looked at him, seeing not a debt or an obligation, but a child who'd lost everything and somehow still believed in heroes. Yeah, he said roughly. Like that. Michael smiled and went back to building. In the crib, Elena stirred, making soft baby noises. Sabrina moved to pick her up, settling into the rocking chair to feed her a bottle. The baby's fingers wrapped around hers, trusting and innocent. Bruno watched them, his expression unguarded, in a way she'd once thought impossible. I never thought I'd have this. Have what? Family. Real family. Not obligation or blood ties, but... He gestured helplessly. This. Sabrina smiled. We're building our own foundation, strong enough to weather anything. The doorway darkened. Maria appeared with a knowing smile. "Dinner's ready. And before you ask, yes, I made enough for the army you keep, adopting." Because Michael and Elena weren't the only ones. There was Sophia, the teenager whose mother worked in one of Bruno's legitimate businesses and couldn't afford daycare. There was James, whose father had been killed working for a rival family and who'd been headed for the streets until Bruno had intervened. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with children's laughter. Bruno Torini was still one of the most dangerous men in Chicago. His enemies still feared him. His name still carried weight in rooms where power was currency. But he came home every night to read bedtime stories. He knew how Michael liked his sandwiches cut, and that Elena couldn't sleep without her butterfly mobile. He'd learned to braid Sophia's hair, and had taught James how to throw a punch properly, and when not to use it. That night, after the children were asleep, and the house had settled into peaceful quiet, Sabrina found Bruno on the couch, in what had once been Lucia's room, and was now simply the nursery. She curled against his side, his arm coming around her automatically. Through the window, snow fell soft and silent, covering the city in white. "Do you ever regret it?" Bruno asked quietly. "That night at Rossetti's, stepping between that bullet and Michael." "No." Sabrina tilted her face up to look at him. "That bullet brought me here, brought me you, brought me home." "Home," Bruno repeated, like the word was foreign. "I spent 20 years thinking this house was a prison, a place haunted by everyone I'd lost. And now? Now it's full of everyone I've found." He kissed her forehead, then her lips, tender and reverent. "You taught me that, Sabrina. You taught me that the strongest thing I'd ever do wasn't kill for what I love. It was learning to live for it." Sabrina's hand found his, their wedding bands clicking softly together. "We both learned. I learned that asking for help isn't weakness. That trust is earned through actions, not words. That sometimes the person who looks most dangerous is actually the safest place to land." They sat in comfortable silence, watching snow transform the world outside. In the morning, there would be challenges. Bruno's empire to maintain, children to raise, a baby to prepare for. John was serving 15 years, and Petrov had been extradited to Russia to face charges there. The threats weren't gone. They never would be in Bruno's world, but they were manageable, and they'd face them together. "I love you," Bruno said against her hair. "You and this chaotic, beautiful family we're building. All of it." "I love you too." Sabrina closed her eyes, breathing in his scent, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her palm. "My dangerous, impossible, perfect man." Outside, the city slept beneath its blanket of snow. Inside, in a room that had once held only grief, a new kind of love bloomed. Messy and complicated and absolutely real. Home wasn't a place you were born into. It was a place you built, brick by careful brick, with people who chose to stay. Sometimes we think safety means never being afraid. But maybe real safety is finding someone who, when you're terrified, stands beside you and says, "We'll figure this out together." Sabrina once believed that powerful men only knew how to take. But Bruno taught her that real power is knowing when to be gentle. And she taught him that the bravest thing he'd ever do wasn't survive his past. It was let someone love him despite it. Maybe that's what all of us are searching for in the end. Not someone perfect, not someone who never makes mistakes, but someone willing to transform their haunted rooms into nurseries. Someone who'll hold you when you're broken and believe you when you say you're strong enough to stand. The world told Sabrina she should fear the most dangerous man in Chicago. But she'd already survived the man everyone thought was safe. So she made a different choice. She chose the one honest enough to show her his scars. And together, They built something neither thought they deserved. A second chance. If this story touched something in your heart, we'd love to hear about it in the comments. What did you think of Sabrina's journey? Of Bruno's transformation? Share your thoughts below. We read every single one, and your words mean everything to us. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances, and subscribe to our channel, because we bring you powerful stories of love, redemption, and hope every single day. Before you go, check out our next video or explore our playlist for more tales of unlikely love and fierce protection. Thank you for being here with us tonight. Until next time, stay safe, stay hopeful, and remember, sometimes the person who saves you is the last one you expected. Good night.